Chapter 32. Talby watched the skiffs depart from the cargo bay using the SV-52's camera. Kalimura and Gunny piloted them nearly side by side out into space. Talby couldn't help but grin. Kalimura was going to make a fine NCO after all. Maybe when they returned to Neptune, he, Gunny, and the captain could pass her on ZG combat. After all, what was better than real-life experience? When the skiffs neared Mira, he activated his private comms to the command crew. "Lieutenant Talby requesting permission to leave the bay."
"Permission granted,"
Dunn said.
"Good hunting."
"Thank you, sir." He put his hands on the interface and activated the throttle with his index finger. Jets of gas puffed from the rear of the vehicle, pushing it silently forward. At 1 meter per second, the vehicle slid from the bay and into space. Once his HUD glowed green, announcing he was clear of S&R Black, he increased speed to 5 meters per second. Talby quickly pumped the attitude thrusters, pushing the vehicle up and away from Mira and the skiffs. He wanted to watch them work from a safe distance. He also wanted to take a look at Mira's hull. The holo display flashed with live video feeds from both Kalimura's and Gunny's helmet cams. Through Kalimura's cam, he watched as Dickerson grab-walked quickly down the hull. He grinned. Dickerson always was a damn space monkey when he wanted to be. The Marine was incredibly skilled at ZG maneuvers. Talby wished all of his Marines were as competent. He increased the positive vector until Mira sat directly below the vehicle. He activated the cameras and began taking video at 200 FPS. There wasn't time for him to understand what he was looking at, much less analyze it, but the feeds dumped into black. Data was what they needed. Raw, unfiltered, unfucked-with data. Black could quickly process the images and determine additional damage or ingress-egress points. He glanced again at the Marine feeds. Dickerson had placed his thruster, but had moved past it. He changed channels to hear Kalimura's squad and listened. Dickerson mentioned something about indentations on the hull. Then the images appeared on Talby's holo display. "Black, any idea what those are?" The AI immediately responded through the private comm.
"No, Lieutenant. The images are hardly well lit, and meaningful analysis is impossible at this point. Perhaps we can get a sample?"
He heard Kalimura tell Dickerson to leave his discoveries alone until after Mira was stabilized. Talby could have overridden her, but he didn't. She was right. They had to complete the tasks in the right order, or they'd never get Mira safe, much less accomplish their actual mission. "I'll add it to the list of things to do later," he told the AI.
"Acknowledged, Lieutenant,"
Black said. The AI's voice sounded disappointed. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Whatever upgrade the trio had applied to S&R Black has certainly made her more helpful, but the personality changes were creepy. He broke the private comm and immediately felt less exposed. With a few expert adjustments, the SV-52 matched Mira's tumble. The giant ship rolled slowly beneath him. With the cameras still running, he should be able to get just about all the data they could possibly need. Piloting the vehicle to the bow, he rotated the SV-52 using the attitude thrusters and began a 5 meter per second flyby of the hull. The personnel decks appeared intact with no more than a few punctures. Whatever had hit Mira's bow had done so with precision and little damage. The punctures looked to have been immediately blistered closed by the integrity systems. Although Mira was more than 50 years old, the technology to suture its own hull had been around for nearly a century. The systems couldn't repair moderate or severe damage, but it was perfect for sealing small perforations from micrometeorites. Still, what the hell had hit the hull? As he continued his flight, Black warned the Marines of a shatterstorm. Talby checked his sensors. The ice and rock shards were well beneath him. Besides, the vehicle was made to weather some debris impacts. So long as a large KBO didn't come out of nowhere and smack him, the 52 would be fine. Captured in Black's powerful floodlights, the shards glistened and sparkled. They were beautiful, like watching a sideways rain in space. He tried to focus on the images of the hull flashing across the display, but the storm had completely captured his attention. By the time he was halfway down the hull, the storm had started to pass. With a pang of regret, he flicked his eyes back to the images. He was coming up on the engineering decks now. Black's assessment that an explosion had occurred near the reactors was spot on. The utmost steel had curled outward like a blooming flower. Jehovah, Talby muttered. They would have to send a nanoprobe inside to determine deck integrity. Something causing an explosion of that size would almost certainly have vaporized the interior deck, if not significantly damaged the others. He made a note in his block with a timestamp of the video feed. Once Mira was stable and under tow, he'd have to make a decision on how to approach engineering. He gazed out the canopy to the darkness of space. Shadowy objects moved across the pinpoint lights of faraway stars. He frowned. This area of the Kuiper Belt was far more crowded than he'd hoped. Black was right. If they left Mira out here too long, she'd probably be smacked by large balls of rock and ice. Considering the damage already done to engineering, a large enough impact could split Mira in 2 or more pieces. That would end their mission in a hurry.
The storm has passed, Lieutenant,
Black said.
We are ready to fire the thrusters.
Talby nodded as if the AI could see him. She probably could. Acknowledged. I'll move out of the way. He activated the attitude thrusters and the vehicle rose further away from the hull. With a few expert touches, the 52 straightened out of its tumble and floated parallel to S&R Black. According to the HUD, he was 300 meters from Mira. Considering the ship's tumble, it wasn't far enough away. Gritting his teeth, he punched the thrusters and sped back toward Black. Once he was at a comfortable distance, he braked and rotated so his nose pointed back at Mira. Okay, Black, I'm secure.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Talby focused his gaze on Mira's hull. Small blue flames of hydrazine burned in sequence. Mira's roll slowed. The thrusters fired again. Mira continued tumbling through space in a lazy arc, but the roll had nearly dissipated. Black fired the thrusters once more, and Mira stopped rolling.
Marines, Mira's axial movement has been stabilized,
Black said over the general comm. Talby grinned. At least the first part of the mission had gone as planned, but stopping the roll was hardly the trickiest part. The 2 skiffs would have to travel away from one another as they headed to different portions of the ship. Kalimura's squad would fly to the bow to place their 8 thrusters, while Gunny's headed aft to engineering. Considering the damage to engineering, Gunny's crew had the more difficult job, further complicated by having 4 relative newbies carry out the tasks. Talby decided he'd shadow Gunny's crew. If something happened, he wanted to be nearby to provide support. If one of Gunny's Marines had an accident, he'd be in the best position to help with lifelines and extra oxygen. Hell, if one of them ripped their suit, he could use the vehicle's emergency cocoon to wrap them up and fly them back to S&R Black.
Lieutenant,
Gunny's voice said over the open comms.
we are ready to place the other thrusters.
Captain? Talby asked. Dunn took a long moment before answering. Talby imagined him having a 3-way conversation with Oakes and Black to fine-tune thruster placements based on the information he gathered during the flyby.
James, we're sending block updates. Here we go.
Acknowledged, sir. All right, Marines, listen up. Fixing the roll was easy. The rest of the hull appears to have micro damage. The personnel deck should be stable enough, but you'll need to be cautious. Gunny, engineering is a mess. I can't determine the extent of the damage, but go as slow as you need to.
Aye, sir.
Gunny said. Kalimura quickly echoed him. Let's do it, Talby said. Good hunting, Marines. He nudged the thrusters and piloted the vehicle to the aft section. He hadn't been able to perform a complete flyby. Talby hoped he'd have more data for Gunny before the skiff reached the target coordinates. Every scrap of data would help. He hoped. Chapter 33. Once they had the all clear, Callie started the long journey to the bow. Her Marines were silent as they floated through space, the skiff's rear jets providing enough thrust to move at 5 meters per second. She quickly matched Mira's tumble and increased her speed. When they reached the hull, she activated the magnetics to keep the skiff's bottom within a meter of the ship's surface. Otherwise, the skiff would have to constantly keep the thrusters firing to match the tumble. She wanted to join Talby's video feed so she could see the rest of the ship, but knew she had to focus on thruster placement. 8 thrusters for 2 Marines to place. At least Gunny had a full complement. He had 1 lookout and 3 Marines to do the job. She cursed Went's carelessness again. Once he was out of the infirmary, she was definitely going to kick his ass.
That is one damn big ship,
Carbonaro said.
Got that right.
Elliot murmured through the comms. Kelly said nothing and kept her eyes on the hull. The top of the ship was scarred, the atmosteel dinged and dented. She brought the skiff to within 3 meters of the hull, her eyes constantly flicking from the view ahead to the view below. The skiff's underside cameras filmed every centimeter the vehicle hovered over. "Dickerson," she said, "look below. Are those what you saw earlier?" Pause.
Ah, Corporal, those are the things.
Kelly had never seen a pine tree outside of hollows. Mars's arboretum was filled with deciduous trees for production of fruit. Coniferous trees had been saved on Earth, but as far as she knew, no Sol Federation facility had room for them. Regardless, the objects embedded in Mira's hull looked like large metallic pine cone analogs. "Where the hell did those come from?" she wondered aloud.
Good question.
Dickerson said. "Great," she thought to herself. "Why don't you just pour all your thoughts into the open comms?" She marked the video with a timestamp and hoped the dozens of cones were some new exosolar material. It would be exciting to bring back samples that no scientist had seen before. They might even be a missing link in their understanding of the universe. "Okay, that's a bit much." She checked her block. The adjustments the command crew had made to their original plans weren't drastic, but they did have to place 4 thrusters on top of the personnel section, as well as 4 beneath. The coordinates had changed, but not their relative locations. She had estimated 30 minutes to place the thrusters and hoped once again she had given her team enough time to accomplish their task. The silence of space was unnerving. The skiff vibrated every time she nudged the attitude thrusters, but without sound, it was merely a feeling that rattled her bones. The toughest part of ZG training had been the vacuum and the lack of sound. During drills and rescue missions at Trident Station, the utter silence of the universe, leaving only the sound of her breath and her heartbeat, had always left her goose-fleshed and giddy. At least in the rings, she could focus on the beauty of Saturn. Here, out in the Kuiper Belt's frozen, desolate, deserted wastes, the silence was a death shroud creeping over her. The skiff's edges, as well as its underbelly, contained powerful floodlights. A dull Atmos steel hull seemed to swallow the illumination, providing no reflection or glare. At the same time, however, the lights revealed burn marks in pockmarked metal. After they passed a few more cones, the hull was clean. The entire ship hadn't been hit by the metallic objects, but there were no doubt hundreds of them along the ship's spine. She wondered if there were any on its belly. Mira was wider than any ship she'd seen before. Even the transport ships traveling between Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn were small by comparison. It made sense considering Mira had to keep over 200 humans alive for a 20-year journey to Proxima Centauri b. With the exception of a rotating command crew, her occupants would have been in stasis for the entire trip. But once there, Mira would be their city, their home. She wondered how far they'd made it before whatever happened. Questions. Like, what were the pine cones? Were there any survivors? And most importantly, what did happen?
Boss?
Carbonaro said.
We starting on the top or bottom?
Dickerson snickered. "Shut it, Dickerson," Kelly said, on the verge of laughter. "Top, Carbonaro."
Aye, Corporal. Just looked like you hadn't decided.
No, she thought. I was thinking about shit I shouldn't be. She checked the coordinates in the map on her HUD. The first 2 were coming up. She fired the 4 thrusters and slowed their pace from 5 meters per second to 1. "Elliot, you watch my Marines. I'm going to be busy driving. Carbonaro, you're up first."
Got it,
she said.
on my HUD.
Kelly slowed the skiff, brought it down to the hull, and increased the magnetics. She turned and watched Carbonaro spider crawl over the edge of the skiff and onto the thruster sled. Carbonaro removed the thruster and parked it on the hull. You have to walk 2 meters to this one and then 10 to the next. I'll drop Dickerson and come back for you. Carbonaro pulled another thruster off the sled and put it next to the first. She raised a finger in salute.
Aye, boss. Good hunting, Dickerson.
Callie returned the salute. Dickerson did too, but his middle finger was extended. Shaking her head, Callie turned around, deactivated the magnetics, and jetted the skiff forward. In an instant, the skiff was 3 meters above a seemingly endless hull and zooming to the very front of the personnel decks. If Elliot wasn't watching Carbonaro in her progress, she'd kick his ass. Or worse, let Carbonaro do it for her. She returned her eyes to the holo display. The next target glowed at the edges of the screen, but it was moving back to center at a fast clip. She cut the speed to half and brought the skiff a little closer to the deck. Just another 10 seconds, she thought. 7 seconds later, she halved the speed again and used the thrusters to push the skiff to the right. Another touch as she eliminated the forward motion, leaving the skiff drifting at 1 meter per second to starboard.
Slick move, Corporal.
Dickerson said.
Learn that in the rings?
Learned more than that in the rings, she said. Her cheeks blushed beneath her helmet, and she was damn glad he couldn't see her face. After another 20 meters, she brought them to a stop. Okay, Dickerson, you're up. By the time she turned around, he had already crawled to the thruster sled and removed one of them. He held it with a single magnetized finger. Dickerson! He didn't respond except to pull out another thruster, hold it in one hand, and then secure the other thruster with the rest of his fingers. He turned slightly so he faced her.
What?
Kelly pointed a finger at him and stabbed at the emptiness between them. You do that shit again, and I'll have you pushing the floor for the rest of the damned mission. You understand me?
Sorry, Corporal,
he said.
I'll get started.
Good. We'll be back. Elliot, she said, and turned to face him. How's Carbonaro?
First thruster placed. She should have the second one done by the time we get there, Corporal.
Excellent. She turned and watched Dickerson. He held the thrusters tightly by the handles and trudged guiltily down the hull to his spot. Let's go, she said. Halfway to pick up Carbonaro, her private comm buzzed.
Gunny here. Status?
2 thrusters down, 2 more in progress, Gunny.
Acknowledged. Let me know when you're done on top.
Aye, Gunny. She wanted to ask how his team was doing, but he'd only yell at her rather than answer the question. Focus on your tasks, she said to herself. Her comms were silent. She wished there was more chatter. Elliot was behind her, but inside a suit, it was impossible to feel his presence, much less feel as though she wasn't alone. She glanced upward and saw only black space punctured by glittering distant stars and shadowy KBOs. In the asteroid belt and Saturn's rings, she never felt alone. There were always mining, transport, and refining ships moving in the distance, or the lights of the many stations orbiting the planet and its moons. She hit the attitude thrusters and brought the skiff into a perpendicular slide above Mira's hull. Carbonaro's suit lights looked like a beacon in the darkness. Carbonaro, she said into the comms, we see you and we're coming in.
Aye, boss,
the Marine responded. When the skiff was 10 meters away, she brought the craft in slow. The skiff still had plenty of fuel, but she wanted to make sure they had enough reserves in case placing the additional 4 thrusters required more effort. One last touch of the attitude thrusters, and the skiff stopped a mere 2 meters from Carbonaro. As soon as Callie activated the magnetics and the craft stabilized, the Lance Corporal grab-walked to the skiff, placed her mag gloves on the gunnel, climbed in, and quickly took her seat.
Ready, boss,
she said. Kelly smiled beneath her helmet. Before she engaged the skiff to return to Dickerson, she brought up his feed on the holo display. She watched in silence as he walked with a single thruster gripped in his hands. The motion of the camera would have made her nauseous, if not for the bio-nannies. Each step required him to lift the mag boot to break the field, and then use the anchored foot to move forward. The movements resulted in an unsettling, jerky motion. Combine that with Dickerson's tendency to look around the hull while moving, and it became an exercise in disorientation. He was nearing the target and would definitely be finished by the time they picked him up. She cut the feed and used the thrusters to get the skiff going again. In a few moments, she was nearing the spot.
Corporal, second thruster placed.
Dickerson said over the comms. Good. Be there shortly,
Aye.
he said. She could already make out the lights of his suit, and then they disappeared. Frowning, she hit the comms again. Dickerson, where'd you go? No response. Dickerson, where are you? No response again. Elliot?
I've got him, Corporal. He's bending down and looking at...
The Marine went silent. Looking at what? What the hell is going on?
Sorry, Corporal. He's looking at something on the hull.
She growled inside her helmet. His suit's tag glowed brightly on her HUD, so she was still able to find him. But why the hell was he staring down at Mira's outmost steel?
Corporal,
Dickerson said.
I have a sample Black needs to take a look at.
Dickerson, she said, not bothering to disguise her annoyance. I told you we'd take care of that after the mission,
I know,
he said.
but this is important.
His suit lights suddenly popped up from the hull. Once she saw him, she cut the skiff's speed and brought the vehicle within 2 meters of him. He had something in one of his gloves as he walked to the skiff and climbed in. She nodded to him. What the hell do you have? He walked to her chair and opened his glove. A rough-hewn cylinder made of a mineral she didn't recognize lay across his fingers. It was only a few dozen centimeters in length and showed no seams or welds. Its dimpled surface had no pattern, the divots seemingly placed in the object at random. The cylinder made her nervous, but she'd no idea why. She suddenly wanted to get off the hull and back to S&R Black. None of this was good.
It's partially magnetized,
he said.
Took a little force to remove it from the hull.
Get it in a sample container, she said, and don't you dare open it. I want that thing quarantined. Dickerson looked up at her in surprise. She couldn't see his face through the visor, but his body language told her everything she needed to know.
It's just some mineral shard.
He said.
Nothing to be concerned about.
I don't care, she said. Lock it in a sample container and put it in the cargo area.
Aye, Corporal.
He sounded like a petulant child, but followed her orders. He opened a large rectangular box made of thick Atmos steel, placed the cylinder in one of the sample sleeves, and locked the container. A moment later, he was back in his seat and staring up into space. Kelly opened the channel. Gunny, we're finished up top. Permission to start on the bottom.
Granted, Corporal. Good work.
She stopped herself from saying thank you. Acknowledged. She switched back to the squad channel. Marines, ready for another flight? After receiving affirmatives from her crew, she powered up the thrusters and began the long trip off the side of the hull and into the space between S&R Black and Mira.